Hi everyone. Today we're going to start our lesson on the Industrial Revolution. We're going to start with Lesson 1, Why England Industrialized, Causes and Effects. The standards covered in this unit are California State Standards 10.3. Students analyze the effects of the Industrial Revolution in England, France, Germany, Japan, and the United States. For Lesson 1, we're going to be looking at two substandards. The first is 10.3.1, analyze why England was the first country to industrialize. And then 10.3.2, examine how scientific and technological changes and new forms of energy brought about massive social, economic, and cultural change. We're also going to be focusing on ISTE, or International Society for Technology and Education Standards, with both of our lessons. So 1.1, Empowered Learner. Students leverage technology to take an active role in choosing, achieving, and demonstrating competency in their learning goals, informed by the learning sciences. And 1.2, Digital Citizen. Students recognize the responsibilities and opportunities for contributing to their digital communities. Okay, what was the Industrial Revolution? Starting in England in the late 1700s, the Industrial Revolution was a series of rapid technological changes in the way items were manufactured, resulting in dramatic changes to the society, economy, and culture of the industrialized world. Why is this important? Because today, rapid technological advances are dramatically changing our society, our economy, and our culture. So look at the influence of artificial intelligence in almost all aspects of our society and our lives. Look at the digital skills needed to be part of the workplace today. And also, increasingly, our culture is defined by the kinds of media we consume and for example, the social media apps that we use. So our society, our economy, and culture today are really defined by dramatic technological changes. Okay, let's look at England before the industrial era. So prior to the industrial era, most people in England lived in rural villages, grew their own food, and made whatever they used. Either they made it themselves or they paid someone to make it specifically for them. Rural people lived and worked close to their homes using local customs, sometimes local dialects, local measurements. Most people lived their entire lives within a few miles of their homes. Most people owned only a few possessions, such as handmade clothes and tools. And here's an example of women spinning wool into linen to make clothes. This is another example of a woman at a spinning wheel making clothes and a hat. This is a pre-industrial man working in a field planting seeds by hand and using a horse to till the soil. And these are some pre-industrial handmade tools. So everything that you had, you used it until it was gone, and then when you could, you replaced it with another handmade tool or item of clothing. So people didn't have a lot of stuff. Okay, this began to change with the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution was a change in the way farmland was managed and food was grown, starting in the late 1600s, and this led to a dramatic increase in food production. The increase in food production resulted in lower prices for food, more food available, and that resulted in a massive increase in the population in England. So between 1700 and 1800, the population of England roughly doubled. However, at the same time, fewer workers were needed for agricultural work. So that led to a surplus of population. There were more people in agricultural communities than work could support. So people began leaving their rural communities, moving to cities in search of new kinds of work. And this picture shows an enclosed farmland. So one of the changes in the agricultural revolution was that people began to close off their fields, making them inaccessible to anyone who didn't own or work on the land. This is an example of a pre-industrial or early industrial tool called a seed drill. And what the seed drill does is it tills the soil, plants the seed, and then covers up the soil, which is the work of 3 or 4 people, all done by one person. So one person can do the work of 3 or 4 farm workers. Again, the lower price of food and the surplus of food meant that a lot more people were being born, but there wasn't work for them all to do in their traditional communities. So in order to find a way to survive, they had to move mostly to cities to look for work. Okay, another aspect of why England industrialized was that there were many canals and rivers that connected English cities, towns, and villages, which made it relatively inexpensive to transport products from where they were made to customers that would buy them. So for example, if you have a shoe factory and you're producing hundreds of pairs of shoes every day, in order to sustain your business, you're going to need to find new customers that need shoes. Well, canals made that relatively inexpensive because you could make your shoes here and transport them here where there were customers who would want to buy them. Also, England had a large number of overseas colonial possessions in North America, in Asia, in Africa, Australia also. These were sources of raw material, things like rubber, cotton, iron, other minerals, wood that could be imported from the colonies to England, manufactured into products, and then sold back to those colonies. This was an economic system called mercantilism. Natural resources. England had a large and easy to access supply of coal, iron, and wood. So coal could be fairly easily mined, same with iron, and there were lots of forests in England to harvest wood, and these materials were the fuel for early industrial machines, along with flowing water. So England had had mills prior to the industrial era, but they had to be situated on rivers, but they would use the water power to power the mill. Coal allowed for the creation of steam engines, which could be used to power textile machineries and really most of the machinery during the industrial era. England also had a high degree of political stability in the late 17 and early 1800s. England had had a stable monarchy and a parliament that worked together, and while there wasn't democracy in the sense that we understand it today, there was a very limited democracy. So some people could be involved in the government, and there were movements for social reform, enough to prevent political upheavals or revolutions. The last war in England had been fought in 1746, so even though England did fight in foreign wars, there weren't wars constantly raging across the English countryside. So there wasn't the fear that your factory would get burnt down by an invading army, for example. English government policies also encouraged stability and economic investment. So, for example, England had a policy of free trade, which meant that the government didn't charge excessive taxes for imported or exported products. So had an economy that encouraged trade and investment. The pound was the world's strongest currency prior to the dollar becoming that as it is today. England had free trade laws, as I mentioned, so merchants were not charged excessive taxes to import and export products. There was government support for new industries, support for entrepreneurs, innovation, and industrial growth. For example, the government helped to create the concept of a limited liability corporation, which is a corporation that investors can invest money in, and if the company fails, they only lose their investment. So that creation encouraged people with money to invest in growing industries. This image shows a number of early industrial factories. This shows the growth of trade through railways in England, and this is a picture depicting early industrial innovations. Why not France? France was England's closest rival in the strength of its military and the size of its empire. However, France failed to industrialize at the same time as England for several reasons. One, in the late 17 and early 1800s, there was massive political and social upheaval in France due to the French Revolution. This is a picture of the French king, Louis XVI, about to be executed by revolutionaries. The French population had also suffered declines due to almost constant warfare from about 1792 to 1815. So there wasn't the surplus population that you found in England. Plus, while France did have overseas empires, it didn't have access to the same sorts of overseas resources and the same sorts of internal markets that England did. France did not have the same canal trade routes that England did. Finally, in France, there was a lack of government support for economic innovation. The government in France prior to the revolution was intent on keeping everyone in their place. So keeping the poor and the few, about 3% of the population of wealthy people, rich. And there was not a lot of room for social mobility. It was actually kind of discouraged and frowned on by people who had wealth and status. Excuse me. Okay, so industrial innovations changed many aspects of England's society, economy, and culture. And by society, I mean the way people behave, the way people live, the way they interact with each other. By economy, I'm referring to people's income level, their working conditions, what they do to gain a living, and their financial stability. By culture, I'm referring to how people identify themselves, whether it's nationality, by region, by social class, by ethnicity. That's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about culture. Steam power, as harnessed in the steam engine, was the innovation that drove most industrial production and machinery. Steam power centralizes production into mills and factories that can be manned by hundreds of workers. Steam power also increases the rate of production of consumer goods. So a factory that had produced 200 pairs of shoes a day, for example, with the innovation of steam power can now produce 5,000 pairs a day. So this drives down the price of goods, but it also creates vast amounts of wealth for factory owners. Steam power also contributed to a culture of innovation in England when inventors competed with each other to develop new and more powerful and more efficient machines. One of the side effects of steam power is that it's mostly fueled by burning coal, which causes extensive pollution. So when you see pictures of steam-powered factories, you don't see steam coming out of the smokestacks. It's smoke, because smoke is a byproduct of the coal that's used to heat up water to make steam. The power loom is a machine for making textiles, clothes. It was one of several innovations that used steam to mechanize the process of spinning cloth. This invention led the way for rapid industrial development of many industries by showing that machines could reduce labor costs and speed up production, both of which led to dramatically increased profits for manufacturers. At the same time, the power loom reduced the cost of clothing so much that common people began buying clothes instead of making them for themselves. And clothes became so inexpensive that something we don't even think about today, but for the first time, people began wearing two layers of clothes, outerwear and underwear. That wasn't possible before steam production or steam-based production because clothes were so expensive. The profits that are generated by the textile industry create a new social elite. So instead of the nobility or the king or whatever being, or even landowners being the social elites, the new social elites are wealthy industrialists and factory owners. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, many people made products in their own homes and then sold them at markets. The factory system was an innovation that replaced that system of manufacturing. So the factory system maximized profits by centralizing labor under one roof. Only factory owners could afford the latest machinery, which drove down costs for manufacturing, sped up production, and drove competition out of business. So for example, if you're making clothes by hand and next to you a textile factory opens up, they will most likely drive you out of business because they can make more product for a much cheaper price than you can. Workers in factories were mostly unskilled and easily replaceable. And because they were so replaceable, they had few rights and worked in really miserable conditions, very, very often long hours, 15 to 16 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week, and often in dangerous conditions. Factory workers began to identify as a new working class, and they felt like they were being oppressed by factory owners. This shows a factory owner oppressing a worker. These show living conditions near a factory where many people are crowded into a small apartment, and these are factory owners. Another innovation is railroads. Railroads were an early industrial era invention that's essentially a steam engine on wheels. Railroads enabled rapid and inexpensive transportation of products nationwide. So products were being sold through rivers and canals, as we talked about earlier, but railroads made it even cheaper, and eventually railroads spread all across England. So virtually everywhere in England, Scotland, Ireland was accessible by rail. This helped to create a national economy where products could be made and then sold anywhere in England, and this contributed to England's growing industrial wealth. Railroads also helped to create a national culture by allowing people to rapidly travel to different regions in the country. So prior to the industrial era, most people lived their entire lives within just a few miles of where they were born, most people. Now it's relatively inexpensive and fast to travel from one part of England to another. So the local regional cultures gradually turn into a larger national culture. Railroads also helped people travel and move to industrial cities, and eventually led to standardizations of time, because if you have trains running all through parts of the country, everyone has to agree on what 12 o'clock is so that trains don't hit each other, and distance. So the mile became the standard measuring of distance in England. A final innovation is mass production. So mass production means the production of a vast quantity of consumer goods. Mass production lowered the cost of consumer products, making them affordable for regular people. So one of the benefits of the industrial era for common people was that they could afford to buy more stuff than they had ever been able to afford before. This led to the creation of a modern consumer society, where instead of people making the things they needed, people bought all of the products they needed, or nearly all of the products they needed. Think about the kinds of products that you have: clothes, phone, even food. Did you make it or grow it yourself? No, you most likely bought it, and in many cases it came from mass production in a factory. This also led to a standardization of society, as most people used the same kinds of mass-consumed products, and it also created an advertising culture where national magazines and newspapers began to tell people what to buy. So, for example, if you want to give your family a good start to the day, you might see an ad for cornflakes, which are being mass-produced at a factory somewhere. This again helps to create a unified national culture where everyone's buying and using the same types of products. Okay, we're going to have two assignments. The first one is a discussion board assignment. This is based on the substandard Analyze Why England Was the First Country to Industrialize and the ISTE standard Digital Citizen. So to find this assignment, click on Why England Industrialized Discussion under Assignments in Canvas. And for this assignment, this is a discussion board, so you'll write an initial post and then you'll reply to peers. So for your initial post, write a paragraph-length post explaining 2 to 3 factors that led to industrialization in England, and include one example of why French industrialization didn't happen at the same time. After your initial post, reply to at least 2 peers outside of your own discussion post thread. In your replies, provide an additional example of a factor leading to industrialization in England that they didn't include, or an additional example of France's failure to industrialize at the same time, or offer constructive criticism or critiques of any incorrect information they may have. You may also record your post in an audio file by clicking on the podcast feed and recording a verbal response either to the initial post or to the peers. And then on the assignment page, there is a rubric. Click on there's 3 dots towards the right. Click on those to find the rubric. The second assignment is looking at how industrial era innovations changed the culture, the society, and the economy of England. So this is a Coggle mind map assignment, and we're looking at standard 10.3.2, examine how scientific and technological changes and new forms of energy brought about massive social, economic, and cultural change, and ISTE 1.1, empower learner. So students leverage technology to take an active role in choosing, achieving, and demonstrating competency in their learning goals informed by the learning sciences. Okay, so click on the second assignment in Canvas. This is the Coggle mind map, industrial innovations that changed England. Use the link provided on the assignment page to the Coggle platform to create a mind map of how industrial innovations changed England. Begin by clicking on the Create diagram box at the upper left of the screen. Click to edit title to create a title for your mind map. So have a title that has something to do with the topic that we've been talking about, industrial era innovations. Then pick 3 examples of industrial era innovations from the Screencastify presentation, or from earlier in the presentation. Add them to your mind map by clicking on an arrow on the outside of your title box. This will create a line with a text box at the end. Add your first innovation here, and then repeat the process for 2 more innovations. Click anywhere on the lines to move the map, or on the circles to make the lines squiggle. Click on the plus sign under each innovation to add branches. Use one branch to show how that innovation affected England's society, one to show how it changed England's economy, and the final branch to show how it affected England's culture. Each example should be a sentence or less, written in the text box, and can be found by reading and inferring information from the PowerPoint portion of this presentation. To be creative, you can add images from the internet that support your examples by clicking on the picture icon within the text box to upload an image. And when finished with your mind map, click on the Share This coggle in the upper right, click on Create New Link, copy the link, and then post it in the assignment submission area. You may also write an essay or create an audio presentation to complete this assignment. Check the rubric to make sure that your submission, whatever form you do it in, includes all the necessary criteria. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions about this assignment. And we'll see you next time for lesson 2.